crisis and simply wished Mr Hunt well in his new job.
He is sad to be leaving Parliament. He's taking on the V&A job, and I wish him well in that. And the last thing I wrote on the letter was, I look forward to visiting the V&A to meet you as director to have a look around. We have a strong message to put out. We're opposed to austerity. We want to see investment in inner city communities. We want to see a continuation of the industrial renaissance and technical renaissance of Stoke-on-Trent, and I'm looking forward to the campaign.
So, what does Mr Hunt's resignation say about the current state of the Labour Party? Well, let's get the views of a trio of advisors to the last three Labour leaders before Jeremy Corbyn. Darren Murphy was a special advisor to Tony Blair. He's now an international election campaign specialist. Deborah Mattinson was a polling expert for Gordon Brown and is the founder of the research consultancy Britain Thinks. And Sonia Sodha was a senior policy advisor to Ed Miliband. She's now the chief leader writer at The Observer. A trio of experts. Thanks for being with us. I'm quite keen to kick off with the by-election. We can talk about the future of the party in a moment. How nervous are you as Labour supporters, Labour members, about the prospect of that fight? Darren, what do you think?
Well, the first thing to say is this is a great job for Tristram, and good luck to him in doing that. It's great news for him.
Great news for the V&A as well.
Yeah, it is. It's very bad news for Labour Party. I think on the by-election, I think it would be very tough. I think that one of the problems that Labour has at the moment is that we tend to be, as a political party, more interested in serving ourselves and our own party members and activists than we are in thinking about how best to serve the communities that we're supposed to represent. And the danger is, if we select someone there or in Copeland or elsewhere as by-elections come up, if we select people who aren't really able to be big hitters like Tristram, people who are the life and soul of the party in many ways, we're really going to leave ourselves in a difficult situation. It's made particularly difficult in a constituency I think that UKIP was second in last time in a way that isn't really usually the norm.
And we know that they can obviously throw forces into by-elections in particular. Are you worried about the
Yes, no,
UKIP
I think that's absolutely right. The problem that Labour faces is a relatively small majority, 5,000 votes. The combined UKIP and Tory vote is massively bigger than Labour's vote. UKIP in second place. And crucially, 70% of people in that constituency voted Leave. And I think that tells you a lot, and that's the bit that's very scary. And that's before you factor in, which I'm sure we'll come on to talk about, the problems that Labour faces in a more general sense. So, you know, it's a tough one. It's a very tough one.
So quite a gloomy prognosis here.
So,
what's your view, Sonia?
I'm afraid there's no optimism coming from this side of the table. I do think in the balance of probability, I think Labour will hang on to the seat, but it looks a lot closer than it should be. I mean, this used to be one of Labour's safest seats in the 1950s, 1960s, and I think we'd all be quite surprised 10 years ago if we thought we'd been sitting here today saying it's actually a three-way marginal and the Conservatives could conceivably take it. UKIP could have, you know, they've not been doing very well since the Brexit referendum in kind of, you know, by-election contests. This is a real test for the new leader, Paul Nuttall. But there's a lot of uncertainty here, and both of those parties are in with a shot. And I just think 10 years ago, that would have been a big surprise to people who sort of care about the future of the Labour Party. So it's a tricky by-election for Corbyn. It comes after, you know, there's going to be a by-election in Copeland as well, because the resignation of another sort of very able MP for the moderate wing of the party.
With an even smaller majority in Copeland.
And an even smaller
majority,
exactly. And, you know, again, there are difficulties there. Corbyn's not very pro-nuclear energy, but that's a big industry up in kind of, you know, in Sellafield, up in Copeland. So, you know, two tricky by-elections, I think, that are going to expose some of the deep structural problems that Labour faces, which is that it doesn't really have a clear position on Brexit. It's got a bunch of voters who voted to stay in and a bunch of voters who stated to vote out, who voted to go out. So how does it bring that coalition together is really tricky for the party.
Yeah, let's talk a bit more widely about some of those problems with Labour. Jeremy Corbyn, pretty clear, this has nothing to do with him. He's got a great job at the V&A that he wants to go to. Tristram Hunt said that he doesn't want to rock the boat. He is rocking the boat, though, isn't he? How should we see this? Should we see this as an act that's prompted by Jeremy Corbyn's direction?
It's very sad that there are a number of Labour MPs who believe that the best way to serve their communities and serve the country is no longer to serve in Parliament, and I think that's very sad indeed. And I'm afraid whether people think it's Jeremy Corbyn's fault or not, ultimately he is the leader of the Labour Party. The culture, the failure, the awful sense of being not just out of control but out of fashion is driven by him. Look at that so-called relaunch this week where his own office was briefing one story and he was then not confident enough to even say it. I mean, it's unbelievable. He is a failing leader of the Labour Party, and the results we're seeing, including the by-election this week, where Labour, I think, had a swing against it, something like 40% in Sunderland, again, another place where there was a very strong vote to Brexit. The results like that are ultimately part of the problem. We are not, I believe, Labour is not yet at the bottom of the collapse in our support that we're going to see. And for as long as Jeremy remains as leader of the Labour Party, our position is fundamentally flawed, and we are in danger of having probably the worst result in our history.
Now, I think supporters of Jeremy Corbyn might say that they would expect an assessment like that from someone who worked with Tony Blair. How about someone who worked with Gordon Brown? Would you agree with that?
They'd probably say they'd expect that as well, but I'm afraid that's what they're going to get, because, I completely agree with what you've said. I mean, we're in a situation where we know most of the people in this country are concerned about how the Prime Minister is handling Brexit. They're not happy. They are very concerned about the economy. 52% of people in a poll that I recently did describe themselves as have-nots rather than haves. The majority of people feel that they are missing out economically. They're very unhappy with the way public services are being run, particularly the NHS, obviously at the moment. That's the big story at the moment. And yet, Theresa May's personal ratings are massively ahead of Jeremy Corbyn's. And through all of this, the government has a sort of somewhere between a 12 and 15-point lead at a point in the electoral cycle where Ed Miliband, for instance, had a huge lead, and we know what happened after that. So it is pretty disastrous, I think.
Well, absolutely, and we're not taking any pleasure in saying this.
No,
it's not because
desperate.
somehow we don't
it's
like
tragic.
it. It's because, in the end, this is my 35th year in the Labour Party. I know most people think that's very difficult. I joined when I was 12. But it's my 35th year in the Labour Party. It's a political party we spent our lives in. It is terrible, it is painful to just watch and see that collapse. But it's collapsing.
And what we've seen with Jamie Reid and Tristram, I think we're going to see many more, because there are bright, talented people who feel they have no future.
And I think, to be fair to Corbyn, he does have a point that, both Jamie Reid and Tristram Hunt have got very good reasons for leaving Parliament. They've both got very good jobs. Jamie Reid, I know, wanted to spend more time with his children. Even if you try and make that argument, though, it's about how it appears to the electors, and it's just not a great look for the Labour Party when Tristram Hunt, somebody who 18 months ago actually threw his hat in the ring for the leadership, 18 months later is leaving Parliament, just doesn't send a very good signal about where the Labour Party is to voters, I think.
It's quite interesting with Tristram Hunt as well, isn't it? As you said, when he thought he was going to be potentially run for the leadership, he was keen to stay in Parliament. As soon as he thinks that is out of the window, or ministerial jobs out the window, he's back down to London. I mean, what are people supposed to think in Stoke? Do they think that he's been parachuted in?
I really think that's a bit unfair. I don't think he's doing this because he didn't get the leadership, but I think he is doing this because he doesn't think that there is any future for the Labour Party at the moment. And I think that's what it's about. And, he's got a great job. That's actually, I'm sure he would say his dream job actually wasn't running the V&A. His dream job was being a Labour MP. But it's turned into a nightmare. That's the problem.
In a Labour government.
In a Labour government. Yes, he wants to be Secretary of State for Education or whatever.
In the end, all of these politicians make massive sacrifices in their family lives and in just the way their lives and careers pan out. And they have to ask themselves, understandably, is it worth it? And I think the conclusion that so many of them are coming to when the outlook for the Labour Party is so singularly hopeless that it's not worth it. It's not that it's not worth working hard for your constituency, but is it worth ruining your life?
Well, pretty gloomy prognosis and quite a lot of agreement there, despite three people who've worked for three different Labour leaders. Darren Murphy, Deborah Mattinson and Sonia Sodha, thank you very much.